Music is playing inside my head over and over and over again, my friend. There's no end to the music.
So many other either books or writing about songwriters tend to focus on the lyrics, but I've never felt that there's enough focus on melody, on composition, on chord structure, and how that all works together. I just tried in my own way to integrate that into the narrative of my book because I think that's an overlooked part of her musical genius.
Welcome to the Musical Innertube. I'm Don Rooney.
I'm John Timpane.
On this podcast, we talk to interesting people about their interesting lives, jobs, hobbies, and passions.
Difference makers who really make a difference. Hello, everyone. Today's guest on the Musical Innertube is a person especially close to our hearts. Jane Eisner is here to discuss her brand new interpretive biography of the great Carole King. It's titled She Made the Earth Move, and it's part of the August Jewish Lives series at Yale University Press. Jane is a very accomplished writer, journalist, editor, public speaker, and consultant, and for more than a decade, she was the Forward's editor-in-chief, the first woman to hold a position at America's foremost national Jewish news organization. Before that, she worked at the Philadelphia Inquirer for 25 years. Here, I must add a personal note. Jane was the editor of the editorial board at the Inquirer when she, obviously under the influence of psychedelic drugs, hired me to be commentary page editor there. It's so exciting at any time to discuss Carole King, one of the greatest American songwriters ever, and your book on her is a real event. Welcome to the Musical Innertube.
Thank you so much, John. It's really wonderful to talk with you after a little bit of a gap.
So Carole King needs little introduction, so I'll give her a little introduction. Born Carol Joan Klein in 1942, she had two careers at least as one of the most successful songwriters in history. First in the late 1950s to late 1960s, during which she wrote for everyone from the Shirelles to the Monkees. Then after a move to Laurel Canyon in Southern California, she emerged in the early 1970s as one of the founders of the singer-songwriter movement. Her album Tapestry is one of the best-selling albums ever, and her music, everything from Chains, covered by the Beatles, to You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman, made world unforgettable by Aretha Franklin, to her own I Feel the Earth Move, You've Got a Friend, and so much else. Her music is on permanent rotation all over the world. How'd I do, boss?
Terrifically.
I learned it all from you. So, Jane, in order to write this book, you studied piano for 2 years, I think, right? You did that?
I did. So I've always been a Carole King fan. I remember just when Tapestry came out, summer 1971. Yeah, I was 15 years old at the time, and it was like this music spoke to me. And John, you remember my husband, Mark, so he knew how much of a fan I was, and some years ago gave me a big, thick book of Carole King piano music. So I start this project and I say, hey, wouldn't it be great if I played her songs? So I go over to the piano and I open the book and I try to play a few songs, and it's a disaster. I just can't do it. Over all the years, I just lost my skills. I couldn't even figure out what notes were. So I realized if I really wanted to do this approach to writing about her music, that I needed to study. And, part of this was a journalistic journey, if you will. And part of it was honestly because I felt I didn't know enough about that aspect of her life and what I wanted to do in the book. When it comes to women, I know a lot about the history of feminism in women. When it comes to the Jewish American story, I'm really good at that. I wasn't a music critic. And of course, Yale University Press, when they accepted my proposal, knew that. I didn't pretend to be otherwise. But, I wanted to speak, if not authoritatively, then at least smartly about this. I I wanted to explain her music to people who knew nothing about it. And I wanted to explain her music in at least a way that people who know a lot about it weren't thinking, I was a blank slate on this. So that's why I studied piano. Still, it took me a while to even just play her easiest songs, and some of her songs I just gave up on because, I learned many things, and the biggest thing that I learned in that process was how complex her songs were, even if they kind of sound simple.
One of the things that you talk about in the book is the Carole King chord.
Mm.
What is that, and why exactly is it different from other piano players?
Well, I wouldn't say she invented this because that wouldn't be fair. It actually has its antecedents in even the Tin Pan Alley musicians.
Mm.
But she was the one to really elevate it. And basically what it is you take a main chord structure, 3 notes, and then a repeat, so 4 notes. And so 1, 3, 5, 8. So taking that course to a 7, so instead of an F, it's an F7, you move, right, you move 8 to 7, and that creates a different sound. So she played with that. She added other notes to those chords, and it made it so that this experimentation actually led to a different sound. And she would often employ this technique to make transitions from one verse to another, to make different sounds that she wanted to make. Um, it it made, even to me, my ear is still not as well trained as you guys. It was hard for me to actually hear, but I did understand it when I started to play piano.
The interesting thing about the Carole King chord, or the C over K chord, as I learned it, was, a lot of people still refer to it that way,
Absolutely.
is that, it was always there. It's in One Fine Day, right? And she uses it a couple of times to turn two other parts of the song. It's so clever. And this is what you're talking about, the unsuspected complexity and sophistication of apparently simple music.
Mhm.
But the other thing is, you say it took you a moment to hear it. I think one of the interesting things is we all heard it hundreds of times thanks to her, and it became part of the vocabulary. It's almost like, how things you see all the time, you stop being aware
Totally.
of seeing. Yeah, you know what I mean? So, and it's such a beautiful thing. And of course, I think once she gets to Tapestry, you can really hear the insides of the chords because of the wonderful recording that
Mhm.
she benefits from, as you say, in that album.
Mhm.
Did it change the way that you saw her? I'm wondering about your musical odyssey. Did you?
Mhm. I think it made me respect her more for her originality. And that's what I was trying to get at. I haven't read all the biographies of all her peers, but I read, a few really good ones about Paul
Mm.
Simon, James Taylor, and they were really good, especially I think the Paul Simon book did what I'm just about to say, but so many other either books or writing about songwriters tend to focus on the lyrics. I mean, look, that's most accessible to us. And certainly in the case of somebody like Paul Simon, it's poetic. Um, but I've never felt that there's enough focus on melody,
Mm.
on composition, on chord structure, and how that all works together. And again, I don't pretend to be any kind of expert on this, but I just tried in my own way to integrate that into the narrative of my book because I think that's an overlooked part of her musical genius.
I think also one of the interesting things to me is that aside from maybe Jerry Lee Lewis, she was one of the first pianists that used all the percussive abilities of a piano, which
Hmm.
later came out with Elton John and Billy Joel and all the other
Mm.
singer-songwriters who used a piano, use that percussive. But, like I said, aside from maybe Jerry Lee Lewis, hers was the first music I heard that, like, I Feel the Earth Move, One Fine Day.
Yes.
All those
Yeah.
intros are bang, 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 bang,
And
bang.
then,
Could
yeah,
easily be done on a drum.
yeah, that's true. But I do want to say that the piano is she called it her native instrument. I mean, it tells her life story. I hope I accomplished this, that I really thought of it being almost like another character in the book, because it's so important and it really distinguishes her from all the other folks, pretty much all the other folks in the Laurel Canyon commune, if you will.
Sure. So both Don and I are going to ask this next question because we were asking it while we were waiting for everything to get started here. When reading the book, and I'm going to quote Don because Don said this just before he came on. It's amazing to us because we read Carole King's Natural Woman, which is her authorized autobiography, and then we read your book, and we were both stunned by something. Don, do you want to pick it up there?
Well, yeah, and now, in fairness to Carole, she says at the beginning of her book, it's a memoir, not really, attached to facts, but still, it was amazing to me to see that there was another whole book there, that there are whole sections of your book that do not appear in her book, that aren't even hinted at in her book. And one of the things that John brought up was the fact that her first husband, Jerry Goffin, had a child by one of the singers that he had an affair with, not even mentioned in the memoir at all.
Yeah.
So she was very selective when she published her memoir about what she remembered, I guess.
Well, I don't think that's unusual. I mean, my experience in sometimes reviewing memoirs is that they're imperfect stories. I mean, first of all, memory is a very tricky thing. So it's difficult to recount conversations, whatever that might have happened 40 years ago. But I also think they're kind of personal manifestos, right? They're sort of saying, here's what I want you to know about me. And some of them, I'm thinking of Barack Obama's memoirs, bring the discipline to a very high level because he was so introspective and because he is such a good writer. And probably if I knew absolutely more about his life, there would be omissions or other things that he might have glossed over or told in his own way.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in her case, because she is such a private person, I think that there are things in her memoir that are quite stunning that she revealed, particularly the physical abuse she experienced from her third husband, even before they married. And, that was very brave of her to do that.
Absolutely.
And so it wasn't just all whitewashing, but I do think it's how she wants to be seen. And I don't necessarily criticize her for that. I mean,
Not at all.
that's what memoir is, especially for people in the public eye or people who want to be in the public eye. It's just that I'm a journalist, so it's my job to go beyond that, to use that as source material, but there would be no reason for me to have this book if all I did was repeat what was in the memoir and not interrogate things that needed interrogation.
Yeah, for me, the interrogation part, the interpretive part, not just to the music, but also aimed at the life too, is what makes the book so interesting to read, because there is kind of by the way, you love Carole King and you admire her, and there's no doubt about it. Telling our listeners this, and I'm not being critical either when I say there is kind of a very polite tug of war on your part, where it's almost like Carole is that person who comes to the party and tells a great story and leaves just before the very interesting part. And you're the journalist who has to either fill in the blanks or speculate on why the blanks are there, which I think probably was very challenging for you as a writer. What can you say about that?
Well, I would say yes, it was challenging. I think there was a third thing that I ended up doing sometimes, which is contrasting the way she told a story to the way others tell the story. And in particular, I did draw upon With Permission from Sheila Weller's amazing book that was published about 20 years ago, Girls Like Us, which looked at the intersection in the younger lives of Joni Mitchell, Carly Simon, and Carole King. And Sheila is also a really good journalist, and there'll be a story that she says one way and Carol says another way. And, my feeling is I'm obliged, if the story seems correct, to bring that up and let the readers decide. Um, some of her peers in high school even described things that didn't necessarily conform with her telling of her high schools. And, again, some of that could just be the ravages of memory over time.
Sure.
But I think some of it is also because she might have wanted to portray herself in one way. And I think this idea gets extended to the Broadway play, Beautiful, because apparently I was told this by the person who wrote the script. She was really adamant that that certain people not appear in and be referenced to. You talked about also the fact that Goffin had this other child, and by the way, that other child. If you go to her Wikipedia page, Dawn Rivas, she counts Louise Goffin and Jerry Goffin, Goffin's two children with Carole King, as her sisters. So there was this wasn't being hidden.
Right.
Tried to interview her and didn't get through. Again, not surprising, but I just thought that was really interesting. I mean, a Wikipedia place is one of the first things you start at when you're trying to research people. Of course, it's really imperfect.
Yes.
If she didn't want that to be listed, she would have made sure they took it
wasn't.
down. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So yeah, I think that there are also things even in Beautiful. Now, some of that was because when you write a play, you have to really constrict and think of a narrative in a much different way. Her father doesn't appear in Beautiful either. But I also think that there were certain things that she didn't want in that play. And again, that's understandable.
What about the situation of not being able to get interviews with particular people? You didn't weren't able to get an interview with Carol, and you said that Goffin's daughter wouldn't talk to you either. How difficult is it for you as a biographer to cut through all that and manage to get to and as a journalist, to get to what's actually there without having the primary source?
Well, honestly, I've never done a biography before. And certainly that presents its own challenges. So I don't really have other experiences to draw on in that regard, but John knows, because we worked together at the Philadelphia Inquirer, that there were certainly times when I wanted to try to interview somebody. Sometimes they stalled and stalled and stalled. One of the most memorable moments was in December of 1983. Bill Green was the mayor of Philadelphia. I was supposed to have a sit down with him because he decided not to run again. Made that announcement in a very controversial way on election day itself, which really annoyed other members of his party, the Democratic Party. And I just kept on asking and asking and asking for this interview, and I just kept on getting stalled. And finally, the bureau chief, for the City Hall bureau chief, and me, when I was working there, we finally get to go. And I walk in, and the reason I remember exactly when this is because I was 9 months pregnant. And
Ooh.
part of my plea was, hello, I'm going to have this baby unless she's giving the interview. And
You threatened to have the child unless Bill Green came through the door. Wow.
and he was so abashed after that. And my daughter was born early. So it really was just a few days after this. Like I finished the interview, got it in the paper, and then within days gave birth. And he sent me the biggest bouquet of flowers to the hospital. I think he felt really badly about that.
But that whole, your experience as a journalist is one of the many things that sets this book apart, because you know exactly where you need to back something up. You know exactly where really to do the back research that allows us to tell a story. So, I just want to say that I'm not surprised that you showed such tenacity with Green, the mayor, and of course, which brings up, and it's a strange segue, but I want to make it anyway. This is part of a series that the Yale University Press has created, a very well-respected series about Jewish lives. And it would be really great to hear you talk about Jewishness and Carole King. She's on a spiritual journey, a lifelong spiritual journey. We can tell that. She both talks about it a lot in her autobiography, but also not so much. And I'm wondering, where do you think she has gone with her Jewishness? Sometimes she embraces it and is very enthusiastic. Other times there's an ambivalence. I'd love to hear you talk about her life as a Jewish life.
Well, thank you. There are many things I love about the Jewish Life series, and one of them is the direction I got from my editor there was talk about our Jewishness, mine it for all it's worth, but don't elevate it beyond what it is. And there's a kind of Jewish writing that Jews want to claim other Jews, even if they're not so necessarily Jewish. Like maybe their grandmother's dentist was, and so suddenly they write about him. So for me, what was important about her relationship to other Jews and to Judaism was that it was emblematic of what was happening in Brooklyn and some of the outer boroughs, Queens, especially, and the Bronx, in post-war America. She, like others, was, her parents were children and grandchildren of immigrants, came here from Eastern Europe with virtually nothing, fought their way up out of the tenements into, kind of a working class. Her father was a firefighter, her mother a part-time piano teacher. They lived in a tiny apartment, and she was like all the other kids around her. I mean, there were some differences, but it was a world. And while there were plenty of non-Jews living there, there were a lot of Jews there. I mean, it was not just in the air, it was just a feeling of expectation that you knew you were a minority in the larger world, but in that particular world, kind of like a shtetl, you were the majority. You weren't everybody, but you were the majority. And so I think that shaped her. So her parents weren't religious. They didn't belong to a synagogue, but her mother made what we consider to be Jewish Ashkenazi food. Her grandmother did. They celebrated the main holidays, in a fashion that was akin to a lot of the other ways that her neighbors did as well. And I think she took that into her adult life in that sometimes it was really important for her to have Jewish ritual. Her first two husbands were Jewish, and they got married in Jewish ceremonies. One of her daughters got married in a Jewish ceremony, and I think most interestingly, her fourth child is a boy, a man now, and she really insisted on him becoming a bar mitzvah. And it was what I gather, a somewhat unorthodox one, you might say. But but it clearly was important to her, even if not maybe to him, but, that's not unusual either.
Mhm.
So, on the other hand, she releases an album called A Christmas Carol, with Carol spelled with the E. And then on the album, she and her daughter and grandson sing this very beautiful Sephardi, sort of. Sephardim are the Jews who come from the Middle East and North Africa, and they have many different tunes from the Jews who came from Eastern and Western Europe. And so they sing this very beautiful Sephardi tune to the prayer that you say when you're lighting the Hanukkah candles.
Mm.
So it's funny. It's like a mishmash in that regard. I'm sure it makes sense to her. Sometimes it's harder for people on the outside to understand it, but it's also not unusual for America today to have
Sure.
people who have that connection, but it doesn't rule their lives.
It does seem important to her.
Yes.
That's the notion that I get, that she both is and isn't part of identity culture. She doesn't go as far as some identity culture goes as of 2025, but I do think where she came from and the notion of roots are, that comes through in her music, and the notion that it's a journey comes through, I think, a lot. So I loved reading about that part.
Oh, well, thank you.
We were talking earlier about her going to high school, and she went to high school with Paul Simon. You'd mentioned reading
No,
his
Paul
biography.
Simon was a peer, but he was in Queens.
Oh, he was in Queens.
They went to college together.
Oh, okay. All right. But she went to high school with Joel Zwick, who was a
Yeah.
very good friend of hers, and he turned out to be a director and writer of films. And I remember reading other biographies where that whole situation of what was the high school she went to? Madison High School?
James
Yes.
Madison.
James Madison. And Madison had a tradition of pitting different classes against each other to write and perform sketches, and she was part of that. And I remember reading other biographies of people who came from that area where that was a very important thing to them. So this seems to have been a cauldron of creativity that she grew up in, maybe even without even knowing it.
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right about that. It was called Sing, Sing in capital letters, and it was a contest every year where students from 10th grade and then 11th grade and 12th grade wrote music, wrote plays and sketches, and performed them for the other students, and then the other students voted on it. And every year that she was involved in Sing, that class won. And it, I think it was part of her emergence of her identity. She wasn't, classically beautiful. She was very young to be in high school. She skipped 2 grades. She was short. She didn't maybe look so perfect in bobby socks, but she had this. She had the piano. She had music. She had creativity. And that was like her big identity then. And you're also right, Madison, and not just Madison, but the whole area around it in sort of southern central Brooklyn, at that time was amazing. I mean, Barbra Streisand was at Erasmus, just next door. Neil Sedaka, Lainey Kazan, just so many different musicians. And then you mentioned Paul Simon. He was in Queens, but he and Carole were classmates at Queens College, and even sort of worked together on some music. And there was just a camaraderie, a rivalry, but definitely a flourishing of that kind of culture at that moment.
One of the things that I like about your way of telling the story is she's such a weather vane, and she sort of not aware of the fact that she has this propensity to absorb what's happening in the world around her and somehow capture it in her songs. she captures, and of course, a lot of the credit does go to Jerry Goffin, who is an amazing lyricist. I mean, I'm astounded by how well Goffin, for his whole career as a songwriter, really captures the female viewpoint, and that is something you do not see a lot.
You're so right, and not just the female viewpoint, but the female sexuality.
This is it.
Yeah.
Is this a lasting treasure, or just a moment's pleasure? Can I believe the magic of your side? Will you still love me tomorrow?
Yeah.
But props to Carole King on Will You Love Me Tomorrow, not only the amazing music, but also the string section charts, the entire musical setting, which is sort of semi-classical in a strange way, but the amalgam of it really nails that moment where attitudes regarding the female viewpoint and young female sexuality, especially, I think isn't that the first Black girl group hit? I think it is. That's 1960.
Yes. Yeah, the Shirelles recorded it, and it just zoomed to the top of the charts.
And for her part, if I may say, along with Jerry Goffin, she also got the Black viewpoint, I think. I mean, Natural Woman, for goodness sake.
Oh my gosh. And
my favorite, by the way, my favorite hands down of all of her work, and I got that single when I was years old and still have it. And not only does it capture the female viewpoint, but especially the music, which is full of gospel, and how she heard that is anyone's guess, but she did.
Well, do you want me to tell a little bit of the origin story about that song? Because it's so cool.
Yes, it's great.
So she and Goffin are living, married, have 2 kids, live in New Jersey. That was like a huge step up for them. And, but they were still working in Manhattan. They're walking down the street. Jerry Wexler, who was legendary producer, sees them, rolls down the window and says, "I need a song for Aretha." They rush to their car, and on the way home to Montclair, start listening to a gospel station in Newark, New Jersey. And it just flowed through them. And one of the things I learned when I learned to try to play that on the piano was, you guys would know this since you're musicians. So a chord, there's like the perfect chord, and then there's a chord that a chord sequence, and then there's a chord sequence that's different, and it's called the plagal cadence, but it's also sort of informally called the amen cadence.
Yes.
Because it's what you hear, what you associate with kind of the ends of a song in a church.
Mm-hmm.
And they nailed it. Like, it never occurred to me that that's what was going on until you listen to it carefully and you realize, like, this is amazing. These 2 Jewish kids are totally getting this gospel sound, writing it for perhaps one of the greatest singers of our time.
Of all time.
And then there's the words. I mean, and here again, what we were just talking about, how Goffin crawled into not just the brain, but the heart of women. You know, I lost my soul was in the lost and found, and you came along to claim it.
When my soul was in the lost and found, you came along to claim it. I didn't know just what was wrong with me till your kiss helped me name it. Now I'm no longer doubtful of what I'm living for, and if I make you happy, I don't need to do more.
of like poetry, but just astonishing. And I also think, I'm going out on a limb here, but why not? I might as well say it. I think there's not just a spiritual quality to the music, but I think you could also read this as a kind of prayer. It doesn't necessarily have to be about a man. It could be about a divine figure, whatever that is in your life. And that too, I find really remarkable.
It's interesting too, because Aretha often accompanied herself on piano. I think she did in the actual recording of this. And I know when Carole was honored at the Kennedy Center, Aretha came on stage and started to play that, and then eventually finished it standing to a standing ovation. But as complicated as you said Carole's chords were, imagine being Aretha and getting presented this whole song. Now she's got to play it on piano. She's got to sing the lyrics. She gets that whole experience. And that must have been something for her to be able to take all that in and bring it back out and say, maybe to herself, that's the perfect song.
And props.
I was going to say, you have three Jews and a black woman, and they channel not only something spiritual and something sexual and something female, but also, isn't this 1967 or 8? Isn't this when America is burning all over from coast to coast? This is the civil rights movement is going on. I mean, that's in the works, that's in, what makes you feel alive, what gives you, freedom to be yourself. It's so much is in that song, and it's amazing where it came from and where it went. Go ahead. I'm sorry, please.
Oh, no. First of all, I just want to give credit where credit is due. And, Jerry Wetzler not only suggested the song when he said make it Natural Woman or something like that. And if you look at the sheet music, he gets credit. It's by Jerry Wexler, Carole King, and Jerry Goffin. But to your point, John, about the what else was going on around that time, I think again, what's so interesting about her music is somewhat earlier, more around the 60s. The beginning of the 60s into the early 60s. And forgive me, but I can't remember exactly when Natural Woman was written and released. But there was a real amalgam of musical influences in New York. She was exposed to Black music from high school days. So there was a big Black music thing happening. You had emigration from Puerto Rico and to New York. And so there was a whole Latin influence. And this played a role in not just her music, in a lot of different kinds of music that was being produced then. And then, music resegregated. And because the singer-songwriter movement in the Laurel Canyon area was pretty much all white.
Sure was.
So you're right to notice this in the context of the historical movements that were happening, but it's also of a moment in time when there were these different ideas and rhythms coming together.
I mean, it has what we call the gospel roll.
Yeah.
And I know so many other songs we could talk about. I mean, I feel the Earth Move, you so well told the story of how they sort of snuck into Joni Mitchell's studio, which is just down the hall. She wouldn't let them use the piano. Well, she was gone for 3 hours. So the whole band just tiptoed over there, and they only have 3 hours to get this song out. And the song sounds like $100,000 million. I mean, it sounds so good. I think it's the best sounding arrangement on Tapestry. It just jumps off the record, and there was something about those sessions where everybody was right on it. Everybody got the idea.
I feel my heart start to trembling whenever you're around.
And there are those things in her life where she was there to nail them, and that's yet a third one. We've been talking about the early girl group songs, and now Tapestry, but also, yeah, Natural Woman is done on Tapestry, isn't it? I think that, yeah, her version of it.
It
Yeah.
is, but it's her singing it. And obviously she's not Aretha, and she doesn't pretend to be. She sings it much more slowly. Um, you know, apropos of our earlier conversation, I feel the Earth Move, besides just being like such a great song melodically and the way she plays it, that was also about female sexuality. I mean, she was coming on very strong. That's in the beginning of the album. She's singing it by herself, accompanied, but still. And the arc of the album is really, really important. It starts and ends with just her singing, and then other things happen as the narration proceeds. But that too was kind of groundbreaking.
Yes.
And you could read a lot into the music.
When I first met my wife, she was going through my collection of CDs or albums. I can't remember what time that was, if we'd even gone over to CDs. But two albums rather, that I've always had in my collection were Tapestry and Court and Spark by Joni Mitchell. I always loved those from the time they came out. And I remember my wife was going through the music, and she held up Tapestry and she said, "I didn't know you were into girly music," which I think pretty much sums it up. There was something in Tapestry that touched everybody, obviously, because it was such a bestseller for so long. And yet there's something universal about all those songs that even Smackwater Jack, you can't talk to a man with a shotgun in his hand.
Yes.
I got to interview Lou Adler, and he told me just these great stories about how Tapestry was constructed. And there were actually 13 songs that they recorded for the album. And he took I don't know what it must have been, tapes or whatever, of those songs, and he went off to Mexico, I think it was, for a few days. And he just wanted to sit with the songs and figure out how to order them. Like, he was insistent that this album not just be 12 separate songs, but that it really had a narrative arc to it. Musically, in terms of what the lyrics were saying, all of that. And the 13th song was put aside. And so he told me that, this was her journey, and it had a certain kind of simplicity and authenticity to it, etc. Now, so then I asked him, like, well, what about Smackwater Jack? I mean, that doesn't seem to fit into that. And he said, yeah, I know. I just really liked it.
He was in the mood for a little confrontation. He just let it all hang loose. He didn't think about the noose. He couldn't take no more abuse, so he shot down the congregation. You can't talk to a man with a shotgun in his head.
I always thought that
Just a
it was
personal preference of his.
I always thought it was a great change of pace for the album.
Yeah.
If Smackwater Jack isn't there, I think a lot. I think that there's a gathering and attention in that song, and it rocks. It swings, and yeah, you don't have any more like that on the album, but maybe that's all you do need. At any rate, I mean, Adler, I think, in sequencing that album, really, that's a work of art in itself. The way that he ordered those songs. Well, and this is how you talk about it in the book too. The way he orders the songs is the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing, if I may, that was truly artistic about that album was the cover. So Jim McCrary, the photographer, for somebody so reclusive of her privacy to be photographed in her home on the windowsill doing a real tapestry, barefoot, that was extraordinary that he was able to capture that and that she agreed to it. And until then, like, mostly album covers were either like the photographs of someone and their faces or some kind of psychedelic thing. It didn't have a real basis in one's home. It wasn't domestic. And, and then he thinks, like, wouldn't it be, he saw the cat roaming around. By the way, the cat's name is Telemachus.
Son of Odysseus, yes.
Yes, exactly. I think they got the cat, if I recall correctly, in New Jersey, and they brought him to California. Anyhow, he's wandering around the house, and McCrary wants to just ask, can I pick him up and move him here? And she says, sure. And so the cat is in the foreground of the album cover, which is like kind of unusual. But it emphasizes the whole, the domestic quality of it. But at the same time, somebody pointed out to me, it's kind of constructed like a classical painting. Among the people I wish I would have been able to talk to, he sadly died some years ago, but he was an extraordinary photographer. And a lot of that comes through in those initial album covers.
When you're talking about also her privacy and her need to stay alone, that became very evident later in her life when she moved to Idaho and went out into an area that didn't have electricity, didn't have running water, and she was raising her kids by the side of a creek up in the middle of the wilderness. Why such an extreme move on her part?
I really don't know. It was one of the, I don't know how to, describe this. One of the least comprehensible episodes in her life. So her third husband, Rick Evers, is the one who persuades her to go to Idaho. They live in a ranch together. He's really, really troubled. He was the one who abused her before and after their marriage. And he ends up dying of a drug overdose. And she's pretty traumatized, you can imagine. I think she was like 35 years old with 4 kids, and she was widowed. And then she stays in California for a bit, and then, really within a span of a few months, she goes back to Idaho. And she meets another Rick Sorensen, whose nickname was TP Rick. So gives you some idea what he was about. And he says to her, I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact name of the community, but he said, like, why don't we go there? And she says, sure, I'm up for an adventure. And so she takes her 2 younger kids. And as you described, Don, in this wilderness area where they didn't have running water and they didn't have electricity, she had to raise her own goats, and she homeschooled her children, who, by the way, ended up doing really, really well academically, so one can't fault her about that. But it was a strange thing to do. I'm sorry. I'm trying to be sympathetic all along, but it was strange, and it was especially strange to do it with a man that I think she only knew for about 3 months, or maybe even less, but it was just 3 or 4 months since her last husband died. And to live off the grid for about 3 years. She would venture in. I think she had to go on skis just to get to the closest town. She was under obligation to produce some albums, and so she did. They were really forgettable.
I was going to say, it's a bracing image that you paint at one point in the book of Carole King, perhaps at that moment, the single best-known musician on the planet, getting up at 4 and going out to milk the goats.
Yeah.
And there was something about her that liked that. That was the life. It doesn't sound to me, at least the way she tells it, and the way that you tell it, I think she wasn't there unwillingly. Nobody was forcing her.
Right.
And then she'd go out to LA and record an album, or go down to Austin and record an album. or maybe even to New York. I don't know how the sequence went. And then go back to Idaho and do that thing. It's amazing. It's just, if people talk about it, I guess, what's another person? Well, McCartney has his farm in Mull of Kintyre, right? Which is way out there, and it shows the same feeling of just wanting to get away from all of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of people who have that. We're reading a lot about Robert Redford right now.
Oh, yeah.
Certainly had his refuge, but this was more. I mean, you can have a refuge, and she ended up, having a very, very nice ranch. I mean, I saw the pictures of it when it was for sale at an Architectural Digest. And that sort of fit more into what you would expect of a celebrity. But this was, I think, something really different. And, I think there's different ways of reading it. You can say she was totally escaping fame, that she had had enough of it. Or you could also say that she was, making a feminist decision to live her life as she wanted it to be. And I got to respect that, even if I frankly wonder about it.
The book is She Made the Earth Move. The subject is Carole King. And we've been talking to Jane Eisner, the author of She Made the Earth Move, a book you should read. And Carole King is known the world over. We're still hearing her songs. So we want to thank Jane Eisner for coming on to the Musical Innertube today.
So much my pleasure. Besides our working together in the past, John, for both you and Don, it is so great to talk to other people who really know music about this. So I very much appreciate this conversation.
And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
Send us an email at musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com.
Or log into our website, musicalinnertube.com, and click on the microphone in the lower right-hand corner to leave us a voicemail.
And while you're on our website, take a few minutes to listen to past episodes of the podcast, along with pictures and biographies of our guests, blog posts, and lots more.
Ooh, darling, when you're near me and you tenderly call my name, I know that my emotions are something I just can't tame. I just got to have you, baby. Yeah. I feel the earth move under my feet. I feel the sky tumbling down. I feel the earth move under my feet. I feel the sky tumbling down. I just lose control down to my very soul. I get hot and cold all over. I feel the earth move under my feet. I feel the sky tumbling down. I feel the earth move under my feet. I feel the sky tumbling down. Tumbling down.